What's up, guys? I'm Chris Spags here, back to another Four Corners video breaking down today's 7-game NBA slate, courtesy of Osmo.com. Now, this was a really tough slate to prepare for, a lot of tough games to figure out, so make sure to like the video right now. It only makes me stronger throughout the course of this Four Corners video, and leave a comment down below. Tell me which value guy you're looking at the most so far. A lot of cheap guys we're going to talk about here, including one who's going to be super highly owned, and also probably the most worrisome on the slate. But like the video right now, and leave a comment down below. The first corner I want to hit on is a game with the Cavs visiting the 76ers. This one is a 221.5 point combined total, and it represents a 2.8 point boost for Philly, while it's flat with Cleveland's season average. Ben Simmons has 30% expected ownership here, and I'll probably come close to that. I think there's some blowout risk for him with this matchup, and his minutes have been down closer to 35 minutes in his last 3 games as opposed to 40 minutes that he was getting before that. So I think we're starting to see the Sixers dial back their minutes a little bit here. Also with Jimmy Butler resting, you're seeing that as well. So I think Ben Simmons a fine play, but one who I do worry about a little bit at that high of an ownership. Joel Embiid to me seems like a more likely initiator of blowout at much less ownership, so I'm interested with him, especially given the fact the Cavs, as we're going to discuss shortly, have really no bigs of consequence left remaining who can stop him. Tobias Harris and JJ Redick should see some extra usage because of Jimmy Butler being sidelined. I think the same blowout risk applies for them. Also should see some extra minutes for James Ennis and TJ McConnell as a result of Butler being out. Neither of these situations are ones where I'm dying to attack, but I do think it does increase the interest in all 4 of those guys in different ways. Now, Ante Zizic projects to be the highest owned guy on today's slate at 46%, and it makes sense. There's going to be no Larry Nance, no Tristan Thompson, no Kevin Love in the lineup. Also, we could presume no Marquise Chris after he fought with Serge Ibaka yesterday. He should pick up a little suspension there. So it's a spot where Zizic is going to have to get some minutes. I think, though, if you just look at the photo here of Ante Zizic that we have for him, the only photo I could find in our photo service of him was him getting attacked at the rim by Mason Plumlee. It's not a spot where you're expecting Zizic to dominate. He's just not a guy who's going to have that star role. So I think if you want to look elsewhere, there's going to be some other value bigs we can talk about. There are some pivots to Zizic, so I would go under that ownership expected for him. Colin Sexton and Cedi Osman should see some extra usage because of Kevin Love out today due to rest. I think these guys are going to be the 2 who really have to score in order to keep this one close. Jordan Clarkson as well in that mix, but if the Cavs have any shot at staying in this one, and I don't know that they do, they just had a really surprising win yesterday versus Toronto. I don't know that they could do that again going on the road on a back-to-back, but if they do keep it close and they keep this one competitive, these 2 guys are going to be the ones. Cedi and Colin Sexton are going to be the ones I think will have to pull their weight. And Brandon Knight's minutes have been up. He's actually had 30 fantasy points and 27.5 fantasy points in his last 2 games, while he's been seeing around 24, 26 minutes in those. So he's an interesting spot. Remains to be seen if he's going to get his full run here because it is a back-to-back and he has had that injury history. But assuming that he does, I think it's a nice spot for Brandon Knight again as a value play. The next corner I want to hit on is a game with the Lakers visiting the Bulls, and this one is a 226-point combined total, which represents a 7.5 point boost for Chicago and a 1.5 point boost for the Lakers. Zach LaVine is expected out again. He's currently doubtful, but it seems like he's going to be out, so that's obviously going to affect everything on the Bulls side. Larry Markkinen picked up a slight usage boost in that game versus Detroit last time, which did not have Zach LaVine, but his rebounding is really a concern here. He's had single-digit rebounds in 4 out of his last 5 games, and really where he was having those smash fantasy days is when he was rebounding at a really high level. The Lakers are a team who should allow him to get back on track with that, but I don't know if he's actually really crashing the boards as much. So I worry a little bit about Larry Markkinen in this spot, just because I'm not sure that he's as motivated to crash the boards right now. Could also be a function of Robin Lopez and they're doing well. I think there is some risk with Larry Markkinen today. I'm a little more comfortable with Otto Porter. He's going to be projected today for 37% ownership, which does seem high, but I think he's a guy who's getting the usage. He's also just a steady play across the board, can contribute a bunch of peripherals in a pace-up spot like this versus the Lakers. So I'm more comfortable with Otto Porter than I am with Larry Markkinen. Chris Dunn and Ryan Arcidiacono are both kind of comparable plays to me. Low usage guys who also don't have a crazy high ceiling. Dunn, obviously a little more likely to score more just because of his role and how he's a bit of more capable player. But they both seem fine to me. Not guys I'm dying to get in the lineups, but if they were from a price perspective, I think it's fine given the pace here and a decent Vegas total. Robin Lopez is probably a bit too expensive right now. He's up to $5,700 on DraftKings, which is just really high for him. And he's also had 2 down games coming off Detroit, in which he was under 20 fantasy points. So could be a nice bounce back spot for him with the Lakers, but really I'm not dying to pay that hefty price. I think if you want to get him, just a little bit of exposure makes sense, and you'll probably be with the field anyway. Mo Wagner for the Lakers had 35 fantasy points in 34 minutes versus Boston. He's also had a 24% usage rate since moving into the rotation in the last 2 games. So Mo Wagner to me is one of those guys who I would consider a pretty strong Ante Zizic pivot, and also a guy who I think just has more upside than Zizic because of this matchup and the fact that they are very committed to giving Wagner minutes right now. I think LeBron James is still in play. He put up 64 fantasy points in just 28 minutes versus Boston. He's also had a 43% usage rate in his last 2 games, so he's just in a mode where he's not even even caring about any of the other guys on the side. Also, Brandon Ingram and Kyle Kuzma being out certainly helps push that usage rate up. Kyle Kuzma's likely to be back, but I think this is still a decent spot for LeBron. I'm not dying to pay that full price tag for a guy on limited minutes, but I think it's an okay spot to go to him if you can't afford to fit him because of all the value available. Kyle Kuzma is expected back in the lineup after practicing fully yesterday. I think he's going to take a little bit of usage off the table for these guys, but I think Mo Wagner's cheap enough. LeBron's still doing enough where they're as fine as they would be otherwise. I think he's more concerning for a guy like Jonathan Williams, who put up 35.5 fantasy points in that last game. A nice double-double versus Boston. Pretty unexpected. He's not going to see the run that he needs to get to have a day like that again. So Kyle Kuzma, an interesting play on his own, but really more impacting the other guys negatively. And after really pushing his usage up while the Lakers were trying to make the playoffs, it seems like Rajon Rondo's taking a backseat. He shot just 7 times in the last 2 games. I think we're going to continue to see that decreased usage for Rondo, trying to do a little more playmaking for the other guys, give them their chances to get their shot falling. I don't think Rondo's in play right now until his price comes down. The next corner I want to hit on is a game with the Bucks visiting the Pelicans. This one is a slate high 235.5 combined total, which represents a 4.8 point boost for Milwaukee, but a 2.3 point decrease for New Orleans. Giannis Antetokounmpo is expected to be the highest owned guy in this game at 27% ownership, and the pace, the matchup, the Vegas total here, that all does support it. I think there is some blowout risk, so I might come a little under Giannis just because I think there is some concern that they just run away with this one, but Giannis does look like a strong play, and it really one without a lot of peers at his price if we're assuming that LeBron just doesn't get enough minutes to get there. Eric Bledsoe's a guy I could find to be a little passive in games that are expected to be less competitive, but he's actually been really interesting in fast-paced spots. For the last month and change, he's had 67 fantasy points in an overtime game versus Sacramento, 52.25 in a game versus the Lakers, and 53 fantasy points in a game versus Washington. So obviously every player benefits from a pace-up spot, but I think Eric Bledsoe in particular has shown a pretty marked difference between him in down-pace spots and in ones with a little more tempo. Brook Lopez and Nikola Mirotic look like the most interesting plays to me out of the ancillary pieces on Milwaukee's side. Brook Lopez at under 5% ownership seems like he makes sense. He's a big guy who should be able to stretch the floor pretty well here. Nikola Mirotic, a bit of a revenge narrative, which if you want to check in there, just a high total game also where he's a binge scorer. He definitely score off the bench, so I think that those reasons are enough to put me on either of those guys. But everybody else on Milwaukee looks fine. I think as fine as they always do. It's just a question of which guys are going to get there. And again, that blowout risk does seem like it's an important one to consider for me. Frank Jackson has put up 20 and 18 shots in the 2 games since Drew Holiday went out. His price is up quite a bit, and he really hasn't been that good, but 20 shots a game is 20 shots a game. If he's going to continue to push that usage up, and he really should have to here versus Milwaukee. Frank Jackson, an interesting play, and a guy who could have more upside than people realize because his numbers on the year just don't look that great. Julius Randle, to me, his price is just too high. He's been under 37.75 fantasy points in his last 3 games. You could see him spike some upside here. Again, it should be a higher scoring matchup, but Randle really not getting a ton of usage, and then this matchup in particular doesn't seem like a fantastic one. I don't mind him, but really only in lineups, I think, in which I have a buck or two on the other side. Elfrid Payton had a 51 fantasy point triple-double versus Atlanta, but it seems like a point chase to expect that again. I don't know that this matchup versus Milwaukee is going to offer the same benefits to him. He really can't stretch the floor enough in order to create space versus a Milwaukee team who's going to close out on him quite a bit. So I don't really love Elfrid in the spot, but I get wanting some exposure to him because that is a pretty notable upside that he's shown without Drew Holiday. Darius Miller and Kenrich Williams should see some extra 3-point looks. The Bucks defense hinges upon using extra bodies to close out on the other guys who are more important threats to slash and kick or to hit shots from deep. I think you're going to see Kenrich Williams in particular get a lot of open looks here. I think it's an interesting spot for him. His price is up, but one of these guys I think will have an outlier day. The next corner I want to hit on is a game of the Wolves visiting the Nuggets. This one has a 227-point combined total, which represents a 6.5 point boost for Denver and a 4.5 point decrease for Minnesota. Now, this game is interesting more so because of the guys who are currently questionable. Both Karl-Anthony Towns and Andrew Wiggins are game time decisions, so that's one you're going to have to watch closer to lock because they're going to have a ton of impact on the lineups if they are ruled out or if they're ruled in. Taj Gibson and Keita Bates-Diop should be the big beneficiaries if Towns and Wiggins are ruled out respectively. Taj Gibson had put up 42.5 fantasy points versus the Knicks without Karl-Anthony Towns over the weekend. He's also had some big games when Cat missed a few because of his concussion. Keita Bates-Diop also 35 minutes and 12 plus shots in his last 2 games without Andrew Wiggins. So these guys are going to get the opportunity. Bates-Diop also contributing some nice peripherals. I think they're both interesting if their counterparts are out of the starting lineup. Jeff Teague also becomes a little more appealing if Andrew Wiggins out. Not an appreciable difference, not one where I'm dying to cram him into lineups, but he does become more appealing if Wiggins were to miss. Nikola Jokic projects for 27% ownership, and that seems about right to me, but I would want to be lower on that if we do get news that Towns is out. I think it's going to make it a little bit harder for the Wolves to keep this one close with the Nuggets, just a really good team. But Jokic seems like he's in a good spot. He hasn't broken 60 fantasy points versus Minnesota in his career, which does seem a bit odd for me, but his price is down a little bit. I think it makes sense to go to him. Gary Harris looks like a decent value to me, but also a pretty decent risk. He's had a 35.5 fantasy point ceiling in his last 4 games, but the other 3 games in that group, 9, 13, and 14 fantasy points, so really not good showings. Again, just a total boomer bust play. I think this is a good spot for him to get back on track, but I wouldn't bank on it at high volume. And Jamal Murray and Paul Millsap both look like solid plays whose roles are pretty secure. I think the upside's questionable because there's just so many bodies in the rotation, and they're just not getting guaranteed a high usage day, even if their shots falling at a high clip. So really, those guys look okay. I prefer Murray to Millsap. Both of them look fine, but again, not guys I'm dying to cram into lineups. So there we go. Those are my thoughts on today's NBA slate. And of course, check the description for my column to switch and hedge on Osmo.com. It has all the things that I'm seeing, a lot more details as well for every single game on today's NBA slate. And make sure to like the video and leave a comment. Tell me which value guy you like the most on today's slate. We've talked about a lot of them, Ante Zizic, Mo Wagner among them. So go ahead, leave a comment right now and like the video. It helps us out a lot. So please do that right now. And check the promo code I'm going to drop in right here. Switch and hedge will get you 50% off your first month at Osmo.com. All the ownership projections and rankings from Osmo, who is the top player in the world. Also premium content like the deep dive, another great accessory content piece, so all the stuff we do for you guys here on YouTube. And also the premium Slack, doing a great job with people talking, exchanging ideas every day. So go ahead, check the promo code Switch and Hedge, get 50% off your first month. I'll be back again tomorrow with another 4 Corners video breaking down the day's NBA slate. So wish you guys the best of luck.